I adjusted my black dress for the 100th time today, smoothing wrinkles that weren't there. The funeral home's air conditioning hummed against my skin, raising goosebumps along my arms as I watched my children, whisper among themselves near the casket. They hadn't spoken to me since the service ended 3 hours ago. "Mom," Melania's voice cut through the ambient murmur of mourning. At 32, she carried herself with the sharp efficiency of someone who'd inherited her father's impatience and none of his warmth. "We need to talk about the house. Not how are you holding up or we're here for you. The house. Of course." Steny flanked her right side, his wife Ivana pressed against his left arm like a designer accessory. At 35, my eldest had perfected the art of looking through me rather than at me. "Dad's lawyer called," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "The reading is Thursday." "Thursday," I repeated, tasting the word. It felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd once known but had forgotten. "We assume you'll want to sell," Ivana added, her voice carrying that particular brand of kindness that wasn't kind at all. "Such a big house for one person. And with your situation, my situation. At 68, I'd become a situation. My situation?" I kept my voice level, though something cold was settling in my chest. Melania exchanged a look with Steny, one of those married couple telepathic communications that excluded everyone else in the room. "Mom, you haven't worked in decades. Dad handled everything. The finances, the bills, the maintenance. You don't even know how to use the online banking." She wasn't wrong. Paul had insisted on managing our accounts, our investments, our entire financial existence. "Let me handle the money, Thelma. You focus on making our home beautiful." For 43 years, I'd focused on making our home beautiful while he built his construction empire, one government contract at a time. "I can learn," I said. Steny's laugh held no humor. "At your age? Mom, be realistic. The house needs work. New roof, foundation issues, HVAC systems shot. We're talking hundreds of thousands in repairs. You'd be better off in one of those nice senior communities. Cypress Gardens has an opening." Cypress Gardens, where old women went to die slowly, playing bridge and pretending their children visited more than they did. "Your father loved that house. Dad's gone." Melania's words landed like a slap. "And clinging to some romantic notion about his memory isn't going to pay property taxes or keep the pipes from freezing." I looked past them toward the casket where Paul lay in his best navy suit, hands folded across the chest that had stopped rising and falling 2 weeks ago. "Lung cancer," the doctor said. 2 years of fighting, of treatments that made him gray and thin, of hope that dwindled like the afternoon light through our bedroom windows. For 2 years, he'd forbidden me from entering the attic. "Too dangerous for you up there, sweetheart. Sharp tools everywhere, dust thick as your fist. Nothing you'd want to see anyway." I'd respected his wishes. In 43 years of marriage, I'd always respected his wishes. "The house isn't going anywhere for now," I said finally. Ivana's perfectly manicured fingers tightened on Steny's arm. "Thelma, you're not thinking clearly. Grief does that. Makes us hold on to things we should let go. Perhaps you're right," I said, though every instinct told me otherwise. "I suppose I haven't been thinking clearly about a lot of things lately." Melania's expression softened slightly, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her all day. "We're just worried about you, Mom. This transition, it's hard for everyone." Transition. As if my husband's death was nothing more than a corporate restructuring, a departmental realignment, clean and efficient and ultimately beneficial for all involved. The funeral director appeared at my elbow with practiced sympathy. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we'll be closing soon." My children began gathering their coats and purses with unseemly haste. Steny pressed a business card into my palm, some financial advisor who specialized in seniors. Melania kissed my cheek, her lips barely grazing my skin. "Think about what we discussed," she said. "The lawyer will explain everything Thursday." Then they were gone, trailing whispers and disapproving glances, leaving me alone with the body of the man who'd shared my bed for 4 decades, but had somehow become a stranger in the end. I approached the casket slowly, my heels clicking against the funeral home's marble floor. Paul looked peaceful, his face free of the pain that had etched new lines around his eyes during those final months. The mortician had done good work. He almost looked like the man I'd married in 1982, full of dreams and ambition and promises about the life we'd build together. 43 years, I whispered to his still form. And I don't know you at all, do I? The drive home took 20 minutes through familiar neighborhoods that felt foreign in the gathering dusk. Our house, my house now, though the pronoun felt wrong, sat at the end of Maple Street like a monument to middle-class achievement. Colonial revival, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, wrap-around porch where I'd served lemonade to countless neighbors over the decades. The American dream, mortgage-free and pristine. Inside, the silence pressed against my eardrums. Paul's coffee mug still sat in the sink, a brown ring staining the bottom. His reading glasses lay folded on the kitchen table beside yesterday's newspaper, open to the obituaries. Had he been checking to see if his name appeared yet? I climbed the stairs slowly, my hand trailing along the banister Paul had installed himself during our first summer here. Each step creaked in a familiar symphony, the 3rd stair with its sharp whine, the 7th with its deep groan, the sounds of a house settling into itself, accepting the weight of decades. The master bedroom felt enormous without his presence. His side of the closet hung empty. I'd donated everything to Goodwill the day after the funeral, unable to bear the sight of his clothes waiting for him to return. But his scent lingered in the fabric of the curtains, the weave of the carpet, the very walls themselves. I sat on the edge of our bed and stared at the ceiling. Directly above me, separated by plaster and insulation, and 43 years of accumulated secrets, lay the attic. Too dangerous for you up there, sweetheart. My children's words echoed in the empty room. You haven't worked in decades. Dad handled everything. At your age? Be realistic. At my age. As if 68 meant incompetent, incapable, finished. I stood and walked to the hallway linen closet, running my fingers along the top shelf where Paul kept the spare keys. House key, garage key, safety deposit box, shed, and there, hanging on a hook I'd never noticed before, a small brass key that didn't match any lock I knew. The attic access was in the hall ceiling, hidden behind a white panel that blended seamlessly with the surrounding plaster. I'd walked beneath it thousands of times without really seeing it. Paul had a telescoping ladder in the garage for the few times he'd needed to venture up there, usually to investigate mysterious sounds or check the insulation. But tonight, as I stood in the hallway holding that brass key, I noticed something I'd never seen before, a thin crack around the panel's edges. And when I pressed against it gently, it moved. Not a sealed access panel at all. A door. A locked door. Too dangerous for you up there, sweetheart. Nothing you'd want to see anyway. I fetched the ladder from the garage, my hands shaking as I extended it. The metal felt cold and solid beneath my palms, real in a way that nothing else had felt since Paul's diagnosis. I climbed slowly, each rung bringing me closer to answers I wasn't sure I wanted to find. The key turned easily in the lock. The attic door swung open on well-oiled hinges, revealing not the dusty chaos Paul had described, but something else entirely. Something that made me grip the ladder's sides until my knuckles went white. The space was pristine, organized, deliberate, and filled with secrets my husband had carried to his grave. Light from the hallway filtered into the attic, illuminating what Paul had transformed into something between an architect's office and a shrine. Drafting tables lined the walls, their surfaces covered with blueprints held down by paperweights I'd never seen before. File cabinets stood sentinel in the corners, their metal surfaces gleaming despite the supposed years of neglect Paul had claimed. I climbed through the opening and onto the plywood floor, my bare feet finding it surprisingly clean. No dust, no cobwebs, no dangerous tools or construction debris, just careful organization and the faint scent of pine cleaner. The first blueprint I examined made my breath catch. Sunrise Academy for Girls, educational complex and safe housing. The drawing showed a 3-story building with large windows, courtyards, and what appeared to be dormitory wings. Paul's handwriting filled the margins. Library on 2nd floor. Computer lab with 30 stations. Counseling offices. Soundproof. art therapy rooms, northern exposure for natural light. My hands trembled as I unrolled the next set of plans. Haven House, transitional shelter for women and children. This one showed a sprawling single-story complex with private family units, communal kitchens, and a central courtyard. More notes. Security system, panic buttons in each room. Playground equipment, age 2-12. Childcare center, state-certified staff. And another. Golden Years Community, independent living for active seniors. Not the sterile, institutional design I'd expected, but something warm and inviting. Garden plots, walking trails, workshop spaces, no more than 50 residents. Community kitchen for those who want to cook together. Library with large print collection and audiobooks. I spent the next 2 hours unrolling blueprint after blueprint. A homeless shelter with dignity-focused design. A community center with meeting rooms named after civil rights leaders. A food bank that looked more like a friendly grocery store than a charity warehouse. Each plan, more detailed than the last, each representing months or years of careful thought. The file cabinets held even more surprises. The first drawer contained correspondence with architects, engineers, and city planners dating back 15 years. Letters about zoning requirements, building codes, ADA compliance. Paul had been serious about these projects. Deadly serious. In the second drawer, I found the medical records. The diagnosis that changed everything. Stage 3 lung cancer, 18 months to live with aggressive treatment. The date on the first oncology report made my stomach clench. 3 years ago. Not the 2 years he'd told me about. He'd hidden his cancer for an entire year. Below the medical files lay a folder marked Legacy Planning, in Paul's careful block letters. Inside, I found detailed cost estimates for each project, potential funding sources, and a timeline that would have taken him well into his 80s to complete, but the cancer had stolen that future. The last document in the folder was a letter addressed to me. My name written in Paul's handwriting, the paper still crisp as if he'd written it recently. My dearest Thelma, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've discovered what I've been hiding. I know you must be angry, confused, perhaps feeling betrayed. You have every right to those feelings. I didn't tell you about the cancer initially because I was afraid. Not of dying. I've made peace with that, but of watching hope fade from your eyes. You've given me 43 years of unwavering support, of believing in my dreams even when they seemed impossible. I couldn't bear to see you stop believing. These projects, they were meant to be my gift to the world. The legacy of a man who spent decades building government offices and strip malls, but always dreamed of building something that mattered. When I learned my time was limited, I threw myself into the planning with desperate energy. I thought if I could just get everything perfect on paper, someone might pick up where I left off. But as the months passed and my strength faded, I realized the truth. I would never see these buildings rise from the ground. The dreams would die with me. I'm not asking you to take on this burden, my love. These were my dreams, not yours. But I wanted you to know that in my final years, I wasn't just the man who handled the finances and fixed the leaky faucets. I was still the idealistic boy you married, the one who thought he could change the world one blueprint at a time. Do with this knowledge whatever feels right to you. I trust your judgment more than I've ever trusted anyone's. All my love, Paul P.S. The children don't know about any of this. I thought it best. I sat on the attic floor, holding the letter until the words blurred through my tears. The children don't know. Of course they didn't. Just as they didn't know their father had been fighting cancer for 3 years instead of 2. Just as they didn't know the man they were so eager to forget had spent his final years dreaming of ways to heal the world. But I knew now. And sitting in Paul's secret workshop, surrounded by his hidden dreams, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Purpose. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I sat at the kitchen table with Paul's laptop, something I'd never touched while he was alive. The password was easy to guess. My middle name followed by our wedding date. Even in his secrets, Paul had included me. His browser history told a story of late-night research sessions, nonprofit organizations, grant databases, architectural firms specializing in humanitarian projects. He'd bookmarked dozens of articles about innovative shelter designs, educational facilities in underserved communities, and funding strategies for charitable construction projects. The phone rang while I was reading about a successful women's shelter in Portland that had been built through crowdfunding and community partnerships. Melania's name appeared on the caller ID. "Hi, Mom. How are you holding up?" "Better than I had in years, actually, but I didn't say that." "I'm managing." "Good. Listen, I had a thought about the house situation. Ivana's friend is a realtor. She specializes in estate sales for seniors. Very gentle approach, handles everything for you. We could have her come by this weekend for an assessment." "This weekend?" I set down Paul's laptop harder than necessary. "Melania? Your father has been dead for 3 days. I know it seems fast, but the market's good right now. If we wait until spring, you might lose tens of thousands in value. And honestly, Mom, the sooner you make the transition, the easier it'll be. Ripping off the Band-Aid, you know? Ripping off the Band-Aid. As if my marriage, my home, my entire life was nothing more than a minor wound to be quickly healed and forgotten. I'm not ready to make that decision yet. Mom," as Melania's voice took on that patient tone she used with difficult clients at her accounting firm. "We talked about this yesterday. You can't handle a house this size on your own. The maintenance alone. I'll hire help. With what money? Do you even know what Dad's pension covers? What the insurance situation is? Mom, you've never handled any of this stuff. You don't know what you don't know." She was right, and we both knew it. Paul had managed every aspect of our financial life with the same meticulous attention he'd given to his construction projects. I knew we had money, enough to live comfortably, but the details remained as mysterious to me as the blueprints hidden in our attic had been until last night. "The lawyer will explain everything Thursday," I said. "Right. But Mom, lawyers charge hundreds of dollars an hour. You don't want to waste money on extended consultations when the path forward is obvious. Sell the house, move somewhere manageable, invest the proceeds. Clean and simple. Clean and simple. Unlike the messy reality of grief, of discovery, of a dead husband who'd hidden both cancer and dreams with equal secrecy. "I'll think about it," I said, though I'd already made my decision. After hanging up, I returned to Paul's laptop and began typing. Not an email to Melania or Steny, not a response to Ivana's realtor friend. Something else entirely. A Facebook post on my long-dormant account. 3 days ago, I buried my husband of 43 years. Today, I discovered that Paul Hartwell, the man my children remember only as a contractor and businessman, spent his final years designing buildings that would have changed lives. A school for at-risk girls, a shelter for women escaping abuse, housing for seniors who deserve dignity, not just safety. He died before he could build any of them. But his blueprints remain, detailed and beautiful, and ready for someone with the vision to make them real. Paul thought his dreams would die with him. I'm here to prove him wrong. I attached photos of the blueprints, carefully cropped to show the architectural details without revealing our address. Then I hit post before I could second-guess myself. The response was immediate. Comments began appearing within minutes. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Neighbors, even strangers who'd been tagged by mutual connections. The post was shared once, then again, then dozens of times. By evening, it had been shared over 200 times, with comments from architects offering free consultations, contractors volunteering labor, and ordinary people pledging small donations. But it was the message from Elena Bryan that changed everything. "Mrs. Hartwell, my name is Elena Bryan, and I'm the director of the Riverside Community Foundation. We specialize in bringing innovative social projects to life through collaborative funding. Your husband's designs are remarkable, exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach our foundation supports. Would you be willing to discuss how we might honor his vision?" I stared at her message for a long time before responding. Then I typed slowly, each word feeling like a small act of rebellion against everything my children expected of me. Yes, I'd like that very much. Elena Bryan arrived at my door Thursday morning with a leather portfolio and the kind of warm smile that suggested she actually listened when people spoke. She was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 45. with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and intelligent dark eyes that took in details without judgment. Mrs. Hartwell, thank you for agreeing to meet. I have to tell you, your husband's designs have already created quite a stir in our foundation circles. The level of detail, the humanity in the planning, it's extraordinary work. I led her to the kitchen where Paul's blueprints now covered every available surface. I'd brought them down from the attic the night before, unable to bear the thought of his dreams remaining hidden any longer. Elena moved from plan to plan with the focused attention of someone who understood what she was seeing. She paused longest at the girls' school design, tracing the pathways between buildings with her fingertip. The residential wings are brilliant, she murmured. Private enough for safety, but connected enough to prevent isolation. And these common areas. He understood that healing happens in community. Paul never told me he was working on any of this. The admission felt like a betrayal, but Elena's expression remained non-judgmental. I found it all after he died. That's not uncommon with visionary projects. Sometimes people need to develop their ideas in private before they're ready to share them. The important thing is that the vision exists. Elena opened her portfolio and spread several documents across the kitchen table. The Riverside Foundation has a unique model. Instead of traditional grants, we facilitate collaborative funding. We bring together private donors, corporate sponsors, and government partnerships to make large-scale humanitarian projects viable. She showed me case studies of other projects they'd supported. A veteran housing complex in Oregon that had been fully funded within 18 months. A community health center in Texas that had grown from one building to a full campus. A technology training center in Detroit that now served 3,000 people annually. The key, Elena explained, is finding projects that capture the public imagination. Your Facebook post has already done that. We've had inquiries from potential donors, volunteers, even a news producer who wants to do a feature story. I thought about Melania's phone call, her impatience with anything that wasn't clean and simple. This was neither clean nor simple. This was messy and complicated and alive with possibility. What would be required of me? That depends on how involved you want to be. At minimum, we'd need your permission to use Paul's designs and your support for the Foundation's efforts. But many family members choose to take a more active role, serving on planning committees, participating in fundraising events, even becoming project directors. Project director. Me, Thelma Hartwell, who according to my children couldn't handle online banking or property maintenance decisions. I'm 68 years old, I said. I've never worked in construction or nonprofit management. I don't have any relevant experience. Elena's smile held understanding rather than dismissal. Mrs. Hartwell, you've managed a household for 43 years. You've supported a successful businessman, raised 2 children, maintained a home, and built relationships in your community. Those are exactly the skills that make great project leaders. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Steenie. Lawyer appointment at 2 p.m. Don't be late. We need to discuss next steps. Elena noticed my expression. Family pressure? My children think I should sell the house and move to a senior community. They believe I'm incapable of managing my own life. And what do you believe? The question hung in the air between us. What did I believe? For decades, I'd believed what Paul told me, what my children expected of me, what society suggested about women my age. But sitting in my kitchen with Paul's dreams spread before me and Elena's respectful attention focused on my words, I found myself believing something different. I believe my husband spent 3 years creating something beautiful, and my children want to erase his memory so they can convert his legacy into convenient real estate. Elena nodded slowly. Then perhaps it's time to show them what legacy actually looks like. The lawyer's office felt designed to intimidate. Mahogany paneling, leather-bound books, and a conference table large enough to seat 12 people. Paul's attorney, David Harrison, had been handling our legal affairs for 20 years, but today he regarded me with the careful sympathy reserved for bereaved widows, who might become complicated. Steenie and Melania flanked me like bookends. Ivana positioned behind Stenie's chair with her hands resting protectively on his shoulders. The unified front they presented would have been touching if it hadn't felt so calculated. Mrs. Hartwell, Harrison began. Your husband left very clear instructions regarding his estate. The house, investments, and business assets are all yours, of course. The life insurance proceeds as well. But he also included specific recommendations about your future housing arrangements. He slid a document across the table. Paul's handwriting covered the margins. Thelma should consider downsizing within 2 years. The house requires significant maintenance that may become overwhelming. Cypress Gardens or similar community would provide appropriate support and social interaction. My children exchanged satisfied glances. Even from the grave, Paul was supporting their position. Of course, Harrison continued, these are recommendations, not requirements. You're under no legal obligation to follow them. But Paul felt strongly about a lot of things, I interrupted, including projects he never shared with any of us. Melania frowned. What projects? I pulled Elena's business card from my purse and placed it on the polished table. The Riverside Community Foundation is interested in funding several humanitarian buildings Paul designed in secret. Schools, shelters, community centers, all detailed and ready for development. Steenie's expression shifted from confusion to irritation. Mom, what are you talking about? Dad was a government contractor. He built office buildings and municipal facilities. Your father was also an idealist who spent his final years designing buildings that would have helped people instead of just housing bureaucrats. Ivana leaned forward. Thelma, you're clearly still processing grief. This isn't the time to make major decisions about imaginary projects. Imaginary? The word came out sharper than I'd intended. I can show you the blueprints. Dozens of them. Professional architectural drawings with engineering specifications and cost analyses. Your father was a brilliant man with a vision that extended far beyond what you gave him credit for. Harrison cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should focus on the immediate estate matters. The house valuation, investment portfolio, insurance proceeds. How much? I asked. Excuse me? How much money are we talking about? The total value of everything Paul left me? Harrison consulted his notes. The house is assessed at approximately $450,000. The investment accounts total just over $600,000. Life insurance proceeds of $300,000. After taxes and fees, you're looking at roughly $1.2 million. The number hung in the air like a revelation. I'd known we were comfortable, but I'd never imagined we were wealthy. Melania leaned forward eagerly. Which is exactly why selling the house makes sense, Mom. You could buy a nice condo at Cypress Gardens for $300,000, invest the rest conservatively, and live comfortably for the rest of your life without worrying about maintenance or property taxes or I could use the money to build something meaningful. Steenie's face flushed red. Mom, that's insane. You're talking about throwing away Dad's life's work on some fantasy projects that probably aren't even buildable. Dad was smart with money. He'd want you to be smart too. Your father was smart with money because he had dreams for that money. Dreams that didn't include parking me in a senior facility so you could stop worrying about me. Ivana's voice took on that patient tone that wasn't patient at all. No one wants to park you anywhere, Thelma. We're concerned about your welfare. Living alone in that big house, trying to manage finances you've never handled, getting involved with strangers who might take advantage of your grief. Elena Bryan isn't a stranger taking advantage. She's a professional who sees value in Paul's work. Elena Bryan is someone you met online 3 days ago, Steenie snapped. For all you know, she's running some kind of scam targeting vulnerable widows. Vulnerable widows. There it was, the core assumption underlying every conversation we'd had since Paul's death. I was vulnerable, therefore incompetent. Grieving, therefore irrational. Old, therefore irrelevant. I stood up slowly, gathering my purse and Paul's letter of recommendation. Mr. Harrison, I assume I can access the investment accounts immediately? Yes, of course. As the sole beneficiary? Good. I'll be in touch about transferring funds for the Foundation's initial project assessment. Melania's voice rose with panic. Mom, you can't just... I can do exactly what I choose to do. It's my money, my house, and my decision. I paused at the conference room door. Your father trusted me enough to leave me everything. Perhaps it's time you started trusting me too. The silence that followed me out of the law office felt different from the silence that had filled my house since Paul's death. This silence carried weight and possibility instead of emptiness. I drove home slowly, taking the long route past the elementary school where I'd volunteered for years, past the park where Paul and I had walked every evening until his illness made walking difficult. Familiar places that suddenly felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. Elena was waiting on my front porch when I arrived, her expression carefully neutral. "How did the family meeting go?" "About as well as you'd expect." I unlocked the front door and gestured her inside. "But I've made my decision. I want to move forward with Paul's first project, the girls' school. How quickly can we start?" Elena's smile transformed her entire face. "Mrs. Hartwell, if you're serious about this, we could have preliminary plans ready within a month and groundbreaking within a year." "I'm serious." The words felt like a vow, a promise to Paul and to myself. "And Elena? Call me Thelma." That evening, I sat in Paul's study, my study now, and began writing letters. To the mayor's office about zoning requirements, to the school district about educational partnerships, to local contractors about preliminary estimates. But the most important letter was the one I'd been avoiding since Tuesday, a response to my children's assumptions about my capabilities, their dismissal of their father's dreams, their eagerness to package my future into something convenient for them. "Dear Melania and Steny, your father spent the last 3 years of his life designing buildings that would have mattered. Not just structures, but places where broken people could heal, where forgotten people could find purpose, where hope could take physical form. You never knew this man. You saw only the contractor, the breadwinner, the practical father who managed finances and fixed broken appliances. But Paul Hartwell was also a dreamer who believed architecture could change lives. I'm going to prove him right. Your concern for my welfare is noted but unnecessary. Your recommendations for my future are appreciated but rejected. Your assumption that grief has made me incapable of rational decision-making is insulting and incorrect. I am building your father's school. You can support this decision or oppose it, but you cannot stop it. And if you choose opposition, if you continue to treat me like a confused child who needs management rather than support, then you'll discover that respect works both ways. I hope you'll surprise me. Your mother, Thelma." I sealed the letter and placed it on the hall table for tomorrow's mail. Then I climbed the stairs to the attic, to Paul's workshop, where his dreams waited to become real. 3 weeks later, my kitchen had transformed into a command center. Elena's foundation team had expanded my small rebellion into something that looked suspiciously like competence. Architectural consultations covered the breakfast nook. Funding projections spread across the counter. A project timeline stretched along the refrigerator, color-coded and precise. I was reviewing soil analysis reports when Melania arrived unannounced, her expression oscillating between fury and disbelief. "Mom, what the hell is all this?" "Language, dear." I didn't look up from the geological survey. The site Elena had identified, 12 acres of undeveloped land on the east side of town, had surprisingly solid bedrock. Paul would have been pleased. "This is what progress looks like." Melania picked up a contractor's estimate and stared at it as if it were written in Sanskrit. "Riverside Foundation? Site preparation costs?" "Mom, this isn't a game. You can't just decide to build a school because you're lonely." "I'm not lonely. I'm busy." I marked a notation on the soil report and moved to the funding spreadsheet. Elena's team has identified 3 potential corporate sponsors and we're applying for state educational grants. The groundbreaking is scheduled for October. "Groundbreaking?" Melania's voice cracked. "You've bought land?" "I've put down earnest money. The purchase agreement is contingent on final permits, which should be approved within 6 weeks. She sank into a kitchen chair as if her legs had given out. "How much money have you spent?" $50,000 so far. Architectural consultations, legal fees, site surveys, permit applications, all necessary expenses for a project of this scope. $50,000. Melania's face went pale. "Mom, that's insane. You can't just throw money away on what? On your father's vision? On something that will help at-risk girls get educations and safe housing? Explain to me how that's throwing money away." Melania's anger collapsed into something that looked like panic. Because it's not real, Mom. Dad wasn't some secret humanitarian. He was a contractor who built government offices and shopping centers. This whole thing is a fantasy you've created because you can't accept that he's gone. I set down my pen and looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. At 32, Melania had inherited Paul's practical nature and my stubborn streak. But somewhere along the way, she'd lost the ability to imagine anything beyond quarterly profit margins and 5-year plans. Your father spent the last 3 years of his life drawing blueprints for buildings that would matter. Not because he was a saint, but because he was dying and wanted his life to have meant something beyond municipal contracts and strip mall construction. Where's the proof? Show me contracts, correspondence with nonprofits, something that proves this isn't just wishful thinking. I pulled out Paul's letter and placed it in front of her. Melania read it twice, her expression growing more troubled with each pass. "This doesn't prove anything," she said finally. "Dad was sick, probably not thinking clearly. People get strange ideas when they're facing death. It doesn't mean we should bankrupt the family chasing his fever dreams." Fever dreams. That's what she thought of her father's final legacy. "Melania, I need you to understand something. This project is happening. With or without your support. With or without your approval. The only question is whether you want to be part of something meaningful or continue treating me like an incompetent child who needs management. I don't treat you like..." Yesterday you called Elena to ask if the foundation had safeguards against elderly financial abuse. As if I were a confused senior being manipulated by criminals. Melania had the grace to look embarrassed. "I was protecting you. You were investigating me. There's a difference." Before Melania could respond, my phone rang. Elena's name appeared on the screen. "Thelma, I have extraordinary news. Channel 7 wants to do a feature story about Paul's designs. They've seen the viral response to your Facebook post and want to interview you for their evening magazine show." I felt Melania's stare boring into the side of my head. "When?" "This Friday, if you're available. They want to film at the proposed school site and interview you about Paul's vision. This kind of media attention could accelerate our funding timeline significantly." "I'll do it." After hanging up, I turned back to Melania, who was staring at me as if I'd announced plans to join the circus. "A television interview? Mom, you've never done anything like that. What if you say something wrong? What if they ask technical questions you can't answer? Then I'll learn the answers." I gathered the soil reports and contractor estimates into neat piles. Elena is arranging media training this week. We're also bringing in Paul's former business partner to verify the technical aspects of the designs. Dad's business partner? Jim Morrison. He retired 5 years ago, but he worked with your father for over 2 decades. He's confirmed that the architectural plans are professionally viable and consistent with Paul's capabilities. Melania's resistance was crumbling into something more complicated. Perhaps the realization that I'd thought through contingencies she hadn't considered. "Mom, even if this is real, even if Dad really designed these buildings, that doesn't mean you're capable of managing a construction project. I've never had the opportunity." The interruption felt like drawing a line in sand. "For 43 years I supported your father's dreams, managed his household, and raised his children. Now I'm pursuing my own projects with my own money, and you're telling me I'm not capable. Why?" "Because..." Melania faltered, searching for words that wouldn't sound as dismissive as her thoughts. "Because it's a huge undertaking. Because construction projects are complicated. Because you could lose everything if something goes wrong. And because I'm 68 years old and supposed to be content with bridge games and early bird specials instead of building something that matters? That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Paul and I had planted during our first spring in this house. 43 years of growth, seasons of bloom and dormancy, roots growing deeper with each passing year. "Melania, your father trusted me enough to leave me everything. Elena trusts me enough to stake her foundation's reputation on this project. When will you trust me enough to let me succeed or fail on my own merits?" Melania was quiet for a long time, studying the papers scattered across my kitchen table. Financial projections, architectural drawings, media schedules, evidence of capabilities she'd never imagined I possessed. "What about Steenie?" she asked finally. What about him? He's even more opposed to this than I am. Ivana thinks you've lost your mind completely. They're talking about… About what? Melania's discomfort was palpable. About having you evaluated. Competency testing. Ivana knows a geriatrician who specializes in cognitive assessments for seniors making questionable financial decisions. The words hit like physical blows. My own children were considering having me declared mentally incompetent because I'd chosen to honor their father's dreams instead of accepting their limitations. I see. My voice sounded calm, which surprised me given the rage building in my chest. And what would happen after this evaluation? If the doctor found evidence of diminished capacity, they could petition for guardianship, to protect your assets from poor decision-making, to protect my assets, or to ensure you inherit them according to your timeline rather than mine. Mom, that's not… Get out. Melania blinked. What? Get out of my house. Now. Mom, please, I'm trying to help. You're trying to steal my autonomy and call it help. You're trying to erase your father's legacy and call it protection. You're trying to turn me into an incompetent old woman and call it love. I moved toward the front door, my steps steady despite the fury coursing through my veins. Get out. Melania followed, her protests becoming more desperate. You're making a mistake. This project will consume everything Dad left you. You'll end up broke and alone, and then what? Who's going to take care of you when the money runs out? I opened the front door and stood beside it, waiting. Melania, I've managed a household budget for over 4 decades. I've supported a successful businessman through economic downturns and business expansions. I've raised 2 children and maintained a home and built relationships that have lasted longer than you've been alive. The idea that I'm suddenly incapable of making sound financial decisions is insulting and wrong. But if you and Steenie want to pursue legal action against me, that's your choice. But understand this. The moment you file papers questioning my competency, you will have chosen sides in a war you can't win. I have money, I have legal representation, and I have a cause worth fighting for. Most importantly, I have nothing left to lose. Melania stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. I don't want to fight with you, Mom. I just want you to be safe. Then support me, or at minimum stop actively working against me. But don't confuse your fear with my limitations. After Melania left, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by project documents and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete clarity about who I was and what I was capable of achieving. The phone rang 20 minutes later. Steenie this time, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Mom, Melania told me about your conversation. We need to talk. No, we don't. This has gone far enough. Dad would be horrified if he knew you were squandering his life's work on some pie-in-the-sky charity project. Your father designed the charity project, Steenie. I'm just making it real. Dad was dying and not thinking clearly. You're grieving and not thinking clearly. Someone needs to be the adult here. The adult. As if I were a child playing dress-up in grown-up responsibilities. Steenie, I'm going to say this once, and I want you to listen carefully. If you pursue legal action against me, if you try to have me declared incompetent, if you continue treating me like a confused old woman who needs to be managed, then you will discover exactly how capable I am of protecting myself and my interests. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. Your father left me $1.2 million and a house worth nearly $500,000 more. I have resources you seem to have forgotten about. I also have a project that's generating national attention and community support. If you force me to choose between my children and my dignity, you might not like which side wins. Steenie's silence stretched long enough for me to hear Ivana's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. We'll be in touch, he said finally. I'm sure you will. After hanging up, I walked back to the kitchen and picked up Elena's business card. Tomorrow we would finalize the land purchase. Next week we would begin site preparation. By October, groundbreaking would commence on Paul's school for girls who needed second chances. My children could support this transformation or oppose it, but they could no longer stop it. The war they'd started by underestimating me was already over. They just didn't know it yet. 6 months later, I stood in the Channel 7 news van watching my children approach the construction site like mourners arriving late to a funeral. The first phase of Paul's school was nearly complete. 3 buildings arranged around a central courtyard, exactly as he'd envisioned. The morning sun caught the large windows he'd specified for maximum natural light, and I could almost see his satisfied smile at how perfectly the architects had translated his dreams into reality. "Mrs. Hartwell, we're ready for the final interview segment," said Carla Tucker, the producer who'd been documenting the school's construction for a follow-up feature. "Would you like a few moments before we begin?" "No, I'm ready." I was more than ready. For 6 months I'd been preparing for this moment, not just the interview, but the reckoning it would bring. Melania and Steny hadn't spoken to me since I'd refused to halt construction despite their legal threats. Their lawyer had ultimately advised against pursuing competency proceedings once Elena's foundation produced documentation of my careful planning, professional consultation, and prudent financial management. But their silence had been its own form of warfare, strategic and punishing. Today, they would learn the cost of that silence. The camera operator positioned himself near the school's entrance while Carla checked her notes one final time. Behind the news crew, I watched my children emerge from Steny's BMW. Melania wore her funeral dress again, as if she were attending another burial. Ivana stayed close to Steny's side, her expression carefully neutral. They moved with the reluctant determination of people fulfilling an obligation they resented. "Thelma, this is beautiful," Elena said softly, appearing at my elbow. Over the past months, she'd become more than a professional ally. She was the daughter I'd never had, the one who saw my capabilities instead of my limitations. Paul would be so proud. The irony wasn't lost on me. A stranger had become family while my family had chosen to become strangers. "5 minutes, Mrs. Hartwell," called the camera operator. I smoothed my navy blue suit, the one I'd worn to Paul's funeral, but which I'd had altered to fit the woman I'd become since then. Stronger, more confident, unwilling to apologize for taking up space in the world. My children positioned themselves near the construction fence, close enough to be included in the background shots, but far enough to signal their disapproval. Steny's jaw was set in the stubborn line he'd inherited from Paul. Melania kept checking her phone, as if urgent business matters might rescue her from witnessing my success. The interview began with softly pitched questions about Paul's vision and my decision to honor it. I answered with the confidence that came from 6 months of proving myself to skeptics, investors, and municipal planning committees. But Carla's final question was the one I'd been waiting for. "Mrs. Hartwell, this project has generated significant community support, but I understand your own family has been less enthusiastic. How has that affected your determination to see Paul's vision realized?" I looked directly into the camera, but I was really speaking to the 2 people standing behind the news crew, the ones who'd tried to diminish me into manageable portions. My husband spent 3 years designing buildings that would change lives, and he died believing those dreams would die with him. My children wanted me to move to a retirement community and convert Paul's legacy into convenient real estate investments. They assumed that at 68, I was too old, too inexperienced, and too emotional to handle complex decisions. I paused, letting the words settle. In the background, I could see Melania's face reddening. They were wrong on all counts. In the past 6 months, I've learned more about construction management, nonprofit administration, and financial planning than I thought possible. I've negotiated with contractors, secured municipal permits, and overseen a $1 million project from concept to near completion. Not because I'm some remarkable person, but because I finally had the opportunity to discover what I was capable of when people stopped telling me what I couldn't do. Carla leaned forward slightly. "And your relationship with your children now?" "My children made a choice 6 months ago. They could have supported their mother's efforts to honor their father's memory, or they could have continued treating me like an incompetent burden. They chose to treat me like a burden." My voice remained steady, matter of fact. "That choice has consequences." After the cameras stopped rolling, I walked slowly toward Melania and Steny. They stood frozen near the fence, as if uncertain whether to approach or retreat. Up close, I could see that Melania had been crying. Her makeup was carefully reapplied, but her eyes remained red-rimmed. Steenie's expression was harder to read, cycling between anger and something that might have been regret. "Mom," Melania began, then stopped, apparently unsure how to continue. "The school is beautiful," Steenie said quietly. He would have been proud. Yes, he would have been. I didn't soften my tone to make this easier for them. He would also have been heartbroken to know his children tried to prevent it from being built. Ivana stepped forward, her voice carefully modulated. "Thelma, we were concerned about your financial security. The risks seemed unacceptable to people who assumed I was incapable of managing them intelligently." I turned to address all three of them. "You spent 6 months treating me like a confused old woman making dangerous decisions. You threatened legal action to have me declared incompetent. You consulted doctors about my mental capacity and lawyers about guardianship procedures, all because I chose to honor your father's vision instead of accepting your limitations on my life." Melania's composure finally cracked. "We were scared, Mom. Dad always handled everything, and suddenly you were making huge financial decisions, working with people we didn't know, committing to projects that seemed impossible. So you decided I was incompetent rather than considering that perhaps I was more capable than you'd ever bothered to notice." "That's not," Steenie started. "That's exactly what happened." I gestured toward the school building, where workers were installing the last of the exterior lighting. "This building exists because I refuse to let your fear define my possibilities. The girls who will live and study here will have opportunities they never would have had if I'd listened to your advice about moving to Cypress Gardens and investing conservatively." The silence stretched between us, filled with the sounds of construction and the distant hum of traffic. My children looked diminished somehow, as if the reality of my success had forced them to confront the smallness of their expectations. "What happens now?" Melania asked finally. "Now you decide whether you want to be part of your father's legacy or continue standing on the sidelines criticizing it." Elena appeared beside me, carrying a folder thick with documents. "Thelma, the dedication ceremony is scheduled for next month. We'll need to finalize the guest list soon." I took the folder without looking away from my children. "Elena, I'd like you to meet my daughter Melania and my son Steenie. They're Paul's children too." The introduction hung in the air, neither warm nor hostile, but loaded with possibility and conditions. Steenie cleared his throat. "What would being part of the legacy involve?" "The school will need ongoing support. Board members, volunteer coordinators, fundraising assistants. Your father's designs included plans for additional buildings, the women's shelter, the senior community center. Those projects will require the same kind of commitment this one did. And if we're not interested?" Ivana asked. "Then you're not interested." I handed the folder back to Elena. "But you don't get to criticize decisions you refuse to support or claim credit for successes you tried to prevent." Melania wiped her eyes with a tissue. "I don't know how to fix this, Mom. I don't know how to go back to before. We can't go back. Too much has happened, too much has been said. But we might be able to go forward if you're willing to respect the woman I've become instead of mourning the woman you thought I was." I turned to walk away, then paused. "The dedication ceremony is October 15th. You're welcome to attend if you want to honor your father's memory. But if you come as guests, not as family members who tried to prevent this building from existing." The words felt final, like the closing of a door that might someday reopen, but would never again close with the old locks. Elena walked beside me toward the parking area, her presence a comfortable counterpoint to the tension I'd just left behind. "That was difficult," she said. "It was necessary." I looked back at the school one more time, memorizing the sight of Paul's dreams made real. My children spent 6 months learning that I couldn't be managed or diminished or controlled. Now they get to decide whether they want to know the mother they never bothered to understand. 2 weeks later, Melania called. "Mom, it's me. I've been thinking about the dedication ceremony, about what you said. I'd like to help with the fundraising for Dad's next project. If you think that would be appropriate." I sat in Paul's study, my study, surrounded by blueprints for the women's shelter, and smiled. "I think that would be very appropriate, Melania. Welcome home. Some wars end with surrender, Others end with the realization that the real victory was never about conquest, but about proving you were worth respecting all along. The school bearing Paul's name opened its doors to its first 25 students on a crisp morning in November. I stood in the courtyard he'd designed, watching young women who'd been failed by other systems begin the work of rebuilding their lives, and knew that some legacies are worth fighting for, even if the fight is with the people you love most.